Tony, it's great to see you back again, man.
It's good to be back.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
I recognize.
Have you guys ever heard of the concept of a Dutch uncle? You know what a Dutch uncle is, right?
Right.
A Dutch uncle is somebody that slaps you upside the head when you slap upside the head.
Right.
That's how I kind of think about Watani. He has a lot of wisdom, and he's going to slap us all upside the head and give us a little bit of that wisdom. We've had him in 2 times before in the past, and it's been a real profound privilege to have you here. Talked about the American dream or the American nightmare, depending on how you look at it. And then we also talked a little bit about some social justice in the past. So background, this last summer I mentioned to you we read Just Mercy.
Right.
And just starting to dig into the collision of race, poverty, and the criminal justice system. So what we wanted to do was start thinking about the prison industrial complex from the perspective of people who have been through it. So we're trying to get a couple of formerly incarcerated individuals to come in and talk about it, how they think about it now, having been through it, some of their experiences. But what I wanted to do was ask you to maybe back up just a little bit, and because a lot of students don't know your whole story, but talk a little bit about how you got to Houston, from the South, the Jim Crow South to Houston, then to Watts, from Watts into us, and us into trouble, trouble into prison, and then prison to here. So can you give it up for him one more time?
So you want the whole story. How many was here the last time? Were 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I don't want to bore you with the same story again, so I'm going to try to tell it maybe in a different way, but I really want to try to save this opportunity to respond to questions that you may have that perhaps I can provide the answer. Also, I have Kim with me. She's Kim Pollack. She's the director of California Prison Focus, and she was very instrumental in with coalitions with trying to end solitary confinement, and they made a lot of progress with that. So I also want to just open it up for her to also to engage in this conversation. Also, it's someone else that's on the phone, which she's going to try to contact. It's
No, that's
you're not going to do it?
No.
You're not going to do it at all?
No, not for.
Okay, so it's you. Okay.
No, they want to hear from
Yeah, you're going to hear from me, but I want to open it up because I know you're going through, you read some very interesting book, probably got a lot of questions. And I want to just share my background and also to give you sort of a glimpse of what it was like before going to prison, doing prison back in the 70s, and also when I returned and some of the changes. Okay? Are we on board?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just start off with saying my name is Watani Steiner, and it was just 2 years ago. I was a California state prisoner serving a life sentence. And although I spent 26 years inside of San Quentin, the very last time that I actually walked the streets of this country as a free man prior to those 2 years was in 1969. That's 50 years ago. That's probably twice your age, maybe 3 times. A little about my background. My life began in the Jim Crow South in Houston, Texas. I can remember the segregated world that I was born into, the separate water fountains, the back of the bus, going around to the back door of Mr. Potno's grocery store to buy milk and bread for my mother and my grandmother. And I even remember a real vivid image. I remember this segregated beach. Now, can you imagine a segregated beach? They had this net that used to separate the whites from the blacks. And I remember as a kid, I used to get real close to that net. And I would see that net, and it seems to me that net went all the way across to the other side of the ocean. And my brothers and sisters, we used to get real close to the net and look, peep on the other side. And it seems like to us that those white kids was having so much more fun than we could ever have as Negroes. I grew up in a Catholic family, a strict Catholic family. And I remember that I was taught that the only way, or at least that was in my mind, that the only way we could get to heaven was to say our prayers, obey God's commandments, and to stay in our place. I was 7 years old when my mother took us on that Greyhound bus from Houston, Texas to California, straight to Watts, a world that was far removed from grandmother's praying hands and her protected morality. I remember that at that time, the world seemed so removed from the morality that I was brought up in Houston. I had to really re-envision the world that I was entering into. Now I was just I was 3 months into my 17th birthday when I married my high school sweetheart. I graduated from high school. I had a well-paying job at a major aircraft company. I used to work for McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, making airplane bombs and stuff for the war in Vietnam. And I was, I graduated from high school. I married my high school sweetheart. I had a well-paying job, and I was about to become the proud father of my first son. That was Larry Joseph Steiner Jr. I was well on my way to becoming your typical Huxtable. I was going to be your American citizen. I was going to really get involved in this society. But then something happened. Something happened that would change my life forever. I used to watch on television as the dogs and the water hoses were being turned loose on nonviolent protesters in the South. And the horrible images filled me with rage. Now, my parents, they looked to Martin Luther King as their heroes. But I couldn't understand why these civil rights demonstrators wouldn't fight back. Why would they take that type of abuse? Now, the 60s was a time when young people all across this country were breaking through racist barriers. We were opening up closed doors of opportunity. And we were raising critical questions about the unequal distribution of power and wealth in this country. And I wanted to be a part of a more confrontational movement that would end racial discrimination in this country. So I sided with other young people who wanted to do the same thing. It's pretty much like today. That's how I put it in the context. Today, where people talk about Black Lives Matter, was the cry of this period, this younger generation. For my generation, it was Black Power, and Black Power to us was self-determination, self-respect, and self-defense. So with this revolts taking place all across this country, they had a revolt in Los Angeles called the Watts. They called it the Watts Riot, but it was the Los Angeles revolt. It was a revolt, not a riot, because a riot is a spontaneous uprising without any political or psychological significance. But as far as a revolt, that's different. That's something that springs from the context, the social context you arrive. So in 1965, this revolt took place. So I wanted to be a part of change in this society. I was young. I was only 20 years old. Well, then I was 17, 18, 19. And so I started looking for organizations. How can I realize my passion? How can I find my passion to bring about change in this country? So I joined an organization called the US Organization. Now, perhaps many of you haven't heard of the US Organization, but the US Organization was founded a year before the Black Panthers in Los Angeles. Matter of fact, the US Organization was the organization that created Kwanzaa. I was a part of the first Kwanzaa celebration in LA when it was just a little small organization of people. Now it's all over the country and outside of the country as well. I've joined that organization, and I wanted to bring about change. The organization was a cultural organization that says that, the revolution that's being fought now is the revolution to win the hearts and minds of our people. And if we fail to win that revolution, then we cannot raise the violent revolution. This was the straw. We had a revolution, internal revolution with our culture, and an external revolution against the forces that want to try to suppress it. not that same year, but a couple of years later, I enrolled in UCLA in the motion picture production program. I wanted to try to document the revolution, was my motivation. I was going to the school not to get a diploma or a receipt, but to see how I can be how I can bring about a change in the society from that point of view. Well, in 1968, when I enrolled in the school, there was a push to try to come up with, try to implement a Black Studies program at UCLA. Now, remember, during this time, there were students on all campus looking to try to implement these ethnic studies program on campus. The first one was at San Francisco State, if you can remember, up here. Well, no, you can't remember. If you ever read, it was up here. Well, at UCLA, there was a move to try to implement one there. Now, at this time, the Black Panther Party also became a part of this of UCLA under the High Potential Program, and there was ideological differences between the organization that I belonged to and the Black Panther Party over who would become the director of that program. On January the 17th, 1969, there was a shootout at UCLA over who would become. It was an argument that took place, and then there was gunplay. I was shot in the shoulders, and two Black Panthers, John Jerome Huggins and Al Prentice Bunty Carter, were shot and killed. I didn't have a weapon at that time, but subsequently, my brother and I were tried and convicted and sentenced to life in prison. We went to the whole death penalty phase. They wanted to give us the death penalty because that is that was considered a capital offense, even though it was conspiracy, even though I didn't have a weapon. But the DA was able to come together with a convoluted theory of hit squad and power struggle and turn it into a battle between the two organizations. Now I realize what happened with COINTELPRO. I'll talk a little bit about that later. That fanned the flame between the two organizations, which I found out after I came back. Anyway, my brother and I was eventually tried and convicted and sentenced to life in prison. I went to Soledad, my brother went to San Quentin. Eventually we ended up at San Quentin. 5 years later, my brother and I escaped from San Quentin State Prison, and I fled the country to South America, where I lived for 20 years. I went to prison in 1969, escaped in 1974, and I lived in South America for 20 years until 1994. I lived in Guyana for 6 years, and I lived in Suriname. If anyone knows Suriname, it used to be Dutch Guyana, just above Brazil. I lived there for 14 years. Now, they didn't know where I was. I mean, if they did, they didn't get me. I had voluntarily surrendered after those 20 years. And the reason I surrendered is because they had a military coup in the country that I went to and a civil war. And I met my wife, my new wife, in Suriname, and we had 7 children. And after the soldiers forced us out of our home and ran us into the bush, and I could no longer provide for my family, and the economy collapsed. My children were no longer able to go to school. I had this bright idea that I would go to the U.S. Embassy and I would negotiate my surrender. Now, you know, they have no reason, it was no reason for me to even believe that they would negotiate with a fugitive. But when I went in there, I knew I had one bargain. I would say, look, I would be willing to surrender if you would provide safe passage for my wife and 7 children. I would be willing to waive extradition, because extradition would take 5-10 years if I contested. And they agreed to it. To speed the story up, Subsequently, I got on the plane with Nancy Pelosi, who was Congresswoman then, who we signed the surrender agreement. I was brought back. The FBI agent came from Venezuela, picked me up, brought me to Dade County, transferred me back to San Quentin. And when I got to San Quentin, they pulled me out the line, put more chains, shackles on my leg, took me to solitary confinement, and then I got a letter from the State Department saying that we do not negotiate with fugitives, and therefore my wife and children could not come to the United States. And that was the most agonizing moment of my life, because I thought I knew my children would feel that I had abandoned them, that I promised them so much. They were eventually separated from each other. My wife had a nervous breakdown, and they were separated in separate foster care homes. Even though I tried to write relief agencies and Salvation Army and try to do all I could, for the next 11 years I could do nothing but pray for them. And so after that period, I just want to say what happened for me coming back to prison, since we're talking about prison. When I left the States in 1974, the prison population in the state of California was less than 25,000. When I came back in 1994, the prison population had jumped to over 150,000. There were only 6 prisons in the state of California in 1974. When I came back, there were 33. That shows that it jumped exponentially, the number of prison population. And I had no idea of what happened. I'm sure you all have read maybe Michelle Alexander's book, or you say you read Just Mercy, but it shows you what happened in that period. I had to relearn all of what was going on in the country from that period on until the time I came back. And that is partially my story. So what I want to do now, I know it's a lot of questions around there. I know one question is, how did you escape? So let me deal with that right now. Real fast. So anyway, I want to open it up. This is my story. It's more details and stuff in it, but I really want to, because I've been talking all this week and last week. So now I want to, I get a lot of satisfaction and engaging with young people on the questions they have, and I want to be open to that. So if I left anything else that may be unclear to you, I want to open it up now for whatever questions you want to ask. You have anything you want to add?
Well, I think maybe later we'll talk about California Prison Focus, what
Right.
we do, or if anyone wants to get involved.
Right. Yeah. So we can get to that. So, question.
What happened to your brother when he escaped?
Well, he's still out there. He had no reason to come back. As a matter of fact, they've been asking me that for years when I came back. That's another reason, because they kept me another 21 years when I came back. And that's because they were mad because I left without asking permission. So they kept me another 21 years. But my brother never came back. And that was one of the questions that I would always, when I go to the board, where's your brother? How did you get away? So he's, let me just tell you, he's still out there. They still want him, He's older now, much older now, so I don't know. They might just want to do it just to, so they're still angry because we got away. But, yeah.
Have you seen your kids?
Oh, yeah. Let me just tell you a little bit about how my kids got here. Because after, like I said, they didn't get here until 11 years. And I had, You know, I had agonized. I wrote people. I wrote organization. Like I said, I did everything I could to try to help them. You know, even people who wanted to help me, I said, you can help my children. Well, what happened is that they had a Dutch-speaking crew who came into San Quentin when I was there. I was at a workshop, and this Dutch-speaking crew, this crew from it's Nova, and it's the Dutch part of it, and they wanted to interview the people who came here from Holland or from Europe that's working for the criminal justice system. So they wanted to interview them and you know, so I was in a workshop when one of them came in to interview this person who was the facilitator of the workshop. He was born in Holland and came here as a teenager. So when they came in the room, I said something in Dutch to the crew, and they got all excited. Hey, you speak Dutch? We want to include him, and you know, I said just what I wanted. And so they came up and they asked his name is Jacques Verdun. Say, can we interview? Where do you pick up Dutch at? You know, and he told him that I was in Suriname for 14 years. You know, so they wanted to include me. So, you know, in prison, one thing that won't happen, you will not be talking to the media without a public relations officer and another guard there to hear everything you say, just in case you plan to try to escape. And, you know, particularly me, they had a double coverage to make sure. But the only thing is that they couldn't understand Dutch. So I'm telling this crew about how they crossed me and my family, how they're suffering, and so they wanted to go to my prison cell so I can read a letter from my daughter. So I in Dutch, I read it, about her missing me and so on. And then they came inside the cell because they wanted to take a picture of the cell. Now, just to give you a picture of what the cells look like in San Quentin, the prisons, the cell. You can't stretch your hand all the way out to the side. You can only take like 9 steps that far. That's the extent of the cell. And you have 2 people in there, so it's a bunk and the bottom bunk. And it's that small. Only one prisoner can be on the floor at one time. That's the size of the prison cell in San Quentin. That's the size that I've lived in for over 2 decades. Inside the prison. So this is the visual of what the prison cell looks like. And so they wanted to come inside. Now she can only come inside. The public relations officer had to stand outside, so they came inside, and when she came inside, I gave her a Nancy Pelosi letter. I gave her the agreement that I had with the government. I gave them all the documents that I got from the State Department. And she took it out, and I didn't think anything else about it. About 4 weeks later, people who viewed the film in Europe started bombarding the Suriname embassy, want to know, how can you do this to his children, And after that changed where they contacted my son. Remember I said I was married when I was in high school, and my son contacted my son and told him, look, we're putting these kids on the plane, and if no one's there to pick them up, we're going to put them in foster care home. And this is how they eventually came. This was 11 years. It was 2005 when they came, and they've been here ever since. So, any other questions? I'm trying not to speak too long. Yeah.
Wait, so what was your state of mind while you were in South America? Were you worried that you were going to get caught, or were you pretty carefree, or
the first part of it was kind of, you're always on guard and stuff. But how we got out of the country, or how I got out of the country, was they had a lot of underground movements back in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of people were going to Cuba, but they was hijacking planes and going to Cuba. Well, Castro said, look, we don't know who's coming to this country, so he cut that out. So the next move was a lot of people who were in the movement during the time were going to Trinidad and to Guyana, and eventually I went to Suriname. You know, so that, you know, so what was your question again?
Just like what was your general?
Oh, my mind. Okay, my state of mind. My state of mind was that the government allowed us to come in, for one thing. So it was a sense of security. We came as traveling preachers, guests of the Guyana government. So we had to go through the training and the Bible and stuff. Because the government allowed us coming, because when we left, we couldn't leave because when we escaped, I went to Oakland. Yeah, Oakland. And then from Oakland, it was a question of how to get out the country or how to leave. But we couldn't take the airplane because anyone read anything about Patty Hearst simulation? Where anyway, they had a whole bunch of people they were looking for, and we didn't want to get caught in the trap. So they sent a U-Haul van from New York to pick us up in Oakland. We drove across country, went to Memphis, Tennessee, and that's where Memphis, Tennessee, they had a church. We were traveling preachers, so they taught us how to answer questions and carry the Bible, and just because my brother and I looked so much alike, it was, you know, they could be looking for people to look alike. So we had to separate. I flew out of Memphis and went to Puerto Rico. My brother flew to Miami, and eventually we met up in Trinidad. But it was, you know, so because we had the support of the government, that made it, you know, there was less fear surrounded that. Because once we got there, the government said they would give us 24 hours if the United States would put pressure or whatever on that. So it was all right. So that initial stay was nervous because we came from there, from prison straight to there, and so after a while it became, how do we integrate into society? They had other people coming from South Africa and from other places that had exile communities in Guyana. So it was a little less, you know. You ain't got to really say. You have to look at the context because during this, it was before, you know, country was fighting for independence, and Guyana just got their independence not too long ago. Suriname got theirs in 1975. So it was a African country were fighting for their liberations, and and the whole just off the heels of the Vietnam War. So it was a whole bunch of movement. Seemed like the whole world. I ran into a culture where reggae became like the backdrop of everything I did, and it was like, wow, this whole, So it was just like a whole new world leaving prison and coming into the Caribbean. It was, yeah. So with no fear, it wasn't as much fear if I had just dropped into a country without the government support and not knowing, what was going on. So, yeah.
How did you escape prison?
Huh?
How did you get out?
I said real fast. No, it was planned. I don't want to go too much in that, but it was a planned thing because during that time they had 1971 they had an uprising in San Quentin, the George Jackson thing that took place in '71. Also Attica, also around that same period, and after that it became real tense inside the prison, particularly with the guards and the prisoners, because they wanted to alleviate this whole revolutionary sentiment that's taking place in there. So Truman Capote, anybody know Truman Capote? Nope. Well, he was a writer and author of books, Cold Blood, In Cold Blood, nope. Okay, anyway, he came into San Quentin, and I volunteered to read out some names of some guards setting up some prisoners, which was not a bright idea. I was young, so I thought it was a revolutionary thing to do. And I read out the names of the guards that were setting up prisoners inside the prison on CBS. And after that, it became urgent for me to get out of prison, my brother and I get out of prison. So we had help from inside, a counselor and a prison guard, who told us the perimeters. We had a overnight visit. We had to make dummies, and had someone from Oakland to come up to drive us. Went to a hotel, separated into the hotel, and waited for the plans for the U-Haul to come from New York. So got out of prison with the help of inside and outside help. That's the only way it worked. And it was like an urgent thing because there was no guarantee that it really would happen, but it was better for us to try to get out than to stay in, we felt, because our life was in danger.
So, if you had a life sentence and you were a fugitive, how did you get out for like the second time?
The second time I got out because, if you're following the prison thing, after I got back and the prison got overpopulated and it was like a big mess for them because you had so many people locked up, up to now 2.2 million. So you had that. So they had to push from Delton. Anyway, they was pushing to try to reduce the prison population. And one category they felt safe with, because I didn't think I would ever get out, safe with was the elderly prisoners, those who were 60 years and older and have served 25 years. Well, I'm almost 70 now, but I served 26 years. So I fit that category, that criteria. So that's how I got out, because of that I don't want to say requirement, but that opened up for a lot of people who were in there for over 25 years and have served. That's 60 years and older.
Molly asked about your state of mind in South America. I want to know what your state of mind was like in prison, considering that you were falsely convicted before you escaped.
Yeah. Okay. Before I escaped, it was I was in my revolutionary mind, so I always thought that this would be like a temporary thing for me, and that prison was like a place where I can get my education, read my books, and then when I get out, I can be more effective in the community and, because prison at that time, it was like just a mirror of what was going on in society. Sometimes it was a distorted mirror because a lot of things that were going on outside was sort of magnified by being in prison, being isolated in that. So my state of mind was still in that revolutionary mode. I wanted to bring about change. I felt that going to prison was a sacrifice that I had to make, and that I looked to Martin Luther King went to prison, Malcolm was in prison, Mandela was in. So I try to situate myself into that category, and that's so that my state of mind was still in that revolutionary thing, not thinking that it'll be permanent. When I came back, that was another state of mind I was in, because I came back, I was angry. I was mad that the government crossed me. I was mad that my children were, abandoned and I couldn't be there for them. I was, so it was angry. It was just a lot of anger. And the only way I could really get through that anger was to write. I used to write, my memoir, my story. Not, feeling that I would write my story and it would be something that my children could read and could follow through. And that helped me get to, I can share this with you, into restorative justice. I came into restorative justice through my writing. I went to a workshop at San Quentin. I was invited to a workshop at San Quentin where, anyone know Fania Davis? She's Angela Davis' sister. Anyway, Fania Davis is really the head of this restorative justice movement in the Bay Area and now in other parts of the country. And she came in there, and I listened to her talk about restorative justice and how there are other people that are part of this whole system that are left out of it, out of the conversation. The community, the family members, and so. As I remember, I mentioned that someone was killed at UCLA. John Huggins was killed at UCLA. And at the time, he had a wife, Erica Huggins. Erica Huggins had a 3-week-old baby at that time. And I used to always wonder about that child, what kind of questions that child would ask the mother about her father, who was killed at UCLA, And at the same time, I was thinking about my own children. I wasn't there, for their birthdays. I wasn't there for their graduations. I wasn't there, for, my grandchildren. I wasn't even there to scare their little conniving little boyfriends. I missed all the important things, and the same token, the same thing happened with Erica. So at this workshop, I went up to Fania Davis, and I asked her if she think Erica Huggins would want to engage in a restorative justice conversation with me. Now, I didn't think anything about it, but my writing led me to it, though. But I didn't think anything about it because I thought she might say, you got a lot of nerve writing me. And, and I had to raise my daughter without her father, and your organization was part of that whole thing. I dare you write me. So I started writing a letter. I wrote a letter. I tore it up. I wrote another one. I tore it, trying to find the right words. And the reason it was difficult for me because I didn't want to open up old wounds. I didn't want to, bring up things that would bring more pain or more harm than healing. And so I wrote. So eventually I got a letter that I sent to her, and I wrote, and she received that letter. And I didn't think anything about it. I didn't think anything about it, and then later I got a letter from her saying that this is what she was looking for all this time. Said she asked the universe, for somebody to tell her that. Because when I was at UCLA and her husband was laying on the floor next to Munchie Carter, I stepped over the body running out of the cafeteria. It was a room about maybe a little bigger than this with like 100 and something people in there. And arguments started and shots were fired, and her husband was killed. So I wrote the letter, and she wrote back and saying that this is what she was looking for. And because she said she had one thing, that we would deal with not either or, but both and that she offered me the gift of forgiveness. Now, I wasn't apologizing for anything I did because I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't have a weapon. I was apologizing because I was a part of an atmosphere that caused the death of 2 human beings. So I was apologizing for that. And so we corresponded. We ended up corresponding for the next 3 years. Just back and forth. We talk about young people. We talk about how we can pass the historical baton on to the next generation. We talk about our children. We talk about the state of things. She was working at Laney College, professor there, and she was working with young women in the Bay Area at the time with restorative justice. And at the same time, I was at San Quentin. I had a column that I used to write called "An OG's Perspective," where I would have conversation with young people, and we would talk about, a male-female relationship. We would talk about violence. We would talk about the gangs. And I would frame it into a column, and it would spark conversation at San Quentin. So we both were doing this work without knowing it, trying to see how we can connect with the young people, how we can, model, what truth and reconciliation looks like. And eventually she came inside of San Quentin, and we had a restorative justice symposium inside of San Quentin. And it had young men in San Quentin, and had people also that came from outside. And Erica and I was able to model what truth and reconciliation looks like. She shared her story, and I shared mine. And we opened it up to young people to ask questions. Now, what we were talking about is not so much the glorification of the movement, like, we can do with the symbols and the Black Power signs and, and the symbols. We were also sharing the mistakes we made, because those mistakes are just as important to share with young people than all the heroic things that we did. Because if we don't do that, then you all make the same mistakes that we make. So it's up to us to do that. And so whenever I talk with young people, and I want to just leave it on this, I always look for things that I can, leave from them. What information would you pass on to young people that you've learned during your time? And there's several things. One thing is to find your passion and drink from the cup of humility, because humility is so important for you to learn. As for me, I always say that, look, I embrace my past. Now, saying that I embrace my past does not mean that I accept my past. I embrace it. I embrace it as my reference point, not my residence. And that's important. Whether you come from your past is about privilege, or whether your past is about, trials and trauma that you've gone through. That's important. Another thing is like history, how important history is. As Malcolm would say, that history is best able to reward all our research. History is important because if you know the history, it removes the mystery. And that's very important for you to learn, because if you know history, then things that appear to be like, wow, it removes that. Like, I'm just throwing him because I figure I got to say his name. Donald Trump, he didn't just emerge out of a vacuum. There's a background. There's a history behind that. And if we understand that history, how it got to this point, then it serves us much better than just to ridicule it, and raise up against it without understanding how this came about. Because if we don't do that, then it'll come about again. So those things are important. These are the things that I like to pass on to young people whenever I talk to them. The conversation I like to have. I like to have those type of conversations, taking out all of the other stuff, and also be willing to listen, because that's where the humility comes from. Because if you have the humility, you not only are able to share your story, but it allows you to listen to other people's stories and to connect with them, because that's where we really find our commonality, is when we understand each other's story. And that's this is something I'm very passionate about. And I don't want to. I said I was going to come here and I was going to allow you to ask me questions so we can have this two-way thing, but it seemed like I ended up doing more talking than I wanted to listen. So I'm going to open it up again. Any other burning questions? It don't have to be burning. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead. What's that? I did have a hand up. Go ahead. Okay, just quickly, how is it that you're not still harboring a lot of anger and frustration?
That's a good question, and I've been asked that question many times, and what I think it is, I don't know if it has to do with old age or not, if that has anything, but I look at what I've gone through, through the movement, through prison, through exile, through the hurts for my family and stuff. I look at it as I have survived. I've come through that, and I'm still resistance. I'm still critical of things that I think that are not right. I'm still standing for what justice is supposed to be, or what I think it was supposed to be. I'm motivated by young people that I see that are so they energize me. It's impossible for me to be angry in that sense. I mean, I can look at it, I can point out certain things, but that to me is like I'm still able. I've come through all that, and I'm still able to still say you're wrong. I'm still able to point to injustice. I'm still able to tell young people don't give up. I'm still able to tell young people that don't give up, don't give out, and don't give in. And that, to me, makes me feel like, yeah, you did that to me, but still, I'm still doing what I think is right to do it. And young people just reflect that back to me and makes me feel like, you know, I'm doing something. So I just this can't happen. You know, as long as young people are doing what they're doing, they're asking the question, because that's the thing is question everything. Everything, question everything. I don't care how good it sounds and how much logic they can add to it. Question it, you know. And as long as that's being done, it's impossible for me to be bitter through that. And I grappled with that for many years, and I keep figuring, well, how come I ain't? I should be mad. And people pointing out to me that this happened, you should be mad. This happened, you should be angry. But you know, given all of that, and that I'm still able to come to you like now, and I'm getting to say, yeah, right, I'm still here, and I'm encouraging you to continue the struggle. Don't give up. You know, that to me, that I can do that and don't care. You know, I mean, don't care in the sense that, you know, they've done all they could to me already. I mean, they took me through things. I consider myself not as a victim. I say I'm a COINTELPRO survivor. And COINTELPRO, you know, that's the government's move to try to... And I say I'm a COINTELPRO survivor because COINTELPRO was the government's tactics to try to disrupt, destroy, and discredit the movement. And it did a well job. It played my organization against the Panthers. I got my FBI files, so I'm not making this up. They can infiltrate organization and get them to you know, character assassinate another one, and just sow confusion, which is part of what I like to talk about. So I say I'm a COINTELPRO survivor, meaning that I'm talking about the totality of it, not just, you know, I'm a political prisoner. Political prisoner, okay. Once you're out of prison, what are you, ex-political prisoner? You know, former political prisoner. So I don't accept that label. I accept myself as a COINTELPRO survivor because I have survived, even though a lot of people under COINTELPRO has been killed, driven out of the country, underground, and also been in prison. They still have people in prison that thought they were involved in the movement during that time. So, no. Yeah, so, yeah, that's the...
Can you just, one more thing, can you finish the stem for me? Life is...
Life is a struggle. Yeah, life is a struggle. Life is a struggle, and it's a struggle that you have no alternative. And not just a struggle, it's a righteous struggle. It's a righteous struggle for social justice. It's a righteous struggle for freedom. It's a righteous struggle to look to other people's story and connect with other people's story. It's a struggle that says that to stumble is not to fall, only to move forward faster. And that's an African proverb, and that's what life is about. You're going to stumble. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get it right. And for you to realize that this struggle must continue, and you got to learn from those mistakes. To stumble is not to fall, only to move forward faster. This is what life is for me. And, you know, I just sometimes get really energized for young people. I had to remind myself how old I am. So I say, yeah. So.
How was your experience in San Quentin? Because you talked about how you called out all of the officers who set prisoners up on CBS, and then also everyone has this image of prison being broken up into race gangs and these horrible, which obviously
I don't want to I don't want to demystify it, and I don't want it in terms of prison, because they are gangs, you know. And I remember I told you about, you know, you got to look at the history of how things came to be. They just don't emerge, even though it appeared that, wow, this just suddenly popped up, that it has a history around it. Well, I realized that during the 60s, when I was involved in the movement, and after COINTEL broke that up, and you know, most of the people that I met when I came back to prison who were involved in prison gangs were people who were sons and grandsons and nephews of people who used to be in the movement. So during that period, you know, and in the whole crack epidemic period that took place, that devastated the community and stuff, those, if you look at the history of how that came about, then it's easy to see what happened, why these gangs and stuff emerged in prisons. And I can't say it enough that they didn't just emerge in prison. They do have gangs. Like I said, a lot of the people that I talk to are people that used to be involved in. Some of them, you know, what happened with the crack that just devastated community, and yeah. So during that period, that whole vacuum, you know, because nothing, you know, exists in a vacuum. So after you remove that, it's like, let me try to do a parallel real quick. It's like, anyone know anything about Libya? Yeah. Well, you know, in Libya, what happened in Libya after they got rid of Gaddafi, and then they created a vacuum in that, and now you have emergence. You know, you can go further than that. So nothing happened. So the same thing happened in the communities, you know, with organization. Those things, that vacuum had to be filled. And so gangs emerged. The Crips and the Bloods are sons and nephews of people who used to be in Black Panthers and US members and other organizations. They are there. So it's the same thing. If you look at it in that way, that something has to fill that vacuum, like what happened in Libya, what happened in other parts of the world, that once you destroy something, you take that out, it's going to be filled by something. It's not going to be the way you may think it is. So you can also equate that, what's going on between, like what happened with the Bloods and Crips, what I was doing back then, that was like a civil war, you know. It was the same thing. We can't equate. We can't do that. We talking about drive-bys, drive-bys. What about this international drive-by when you send these, you know, when you target certain people? That's a drive-by, you know. So we have to be able to look at the bigger picture, you know. But also we have to be able to, in order to understand it, we have to be able to look at the history, because the history really just removes all of the mysteries, and it answers some of the, you know, at least some of the questions that you have. They don't just emerge. How did this come about is the question that young people should ask of everything, you know. Yeah.
One more question, and then maybe.
I was just wondering, like, what was the role of religion in your experience? Like, you mentioned that you were Catholic.
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was like I say, Catholic was my, you know, that's what my family, and we grew up in that, and I came in. Religion, to me, I was questioning it, just like everything else, you know. So religion, I had wrestled with it a lot, you know. I wrestled with it a whole lot because, you know, the moral values, the catechism, everything was just deeply embedded in me. But I wrestled with it in terms of race. I started questioning, you know, God. If, you know, God, could he allow this to happen to us? Why does he look like this? Why is this imposed on? So I started asking. It was part of my revolutionary questioning of things. That's why I like to encourage young people to always question. So it was a part of me, but it was sort of a suppressed part of me, because I used to say, my grandmother taught me, whenever you're in trouble, say, Jesus, mercy, Mary, help. I mean, that was something in Houston, and, you know, the prayer and stuff. I used to say that, but I would not say it out loud. I would say it when I'm in trouble, you know. So it was always a part of my, you know, my being, but it was also a struggle, because as I questioned everything else, the politics, I also questioned. Thank you. I also questioned who God was and His role in my life, and that was a internal suppressed struggle that I had with myself, trying to make sense of my religious worldview, as well as my political. How can I reconcile that? So, yeah. But now I, you know, I don't pass any judgment for me. You know, one thing about religion that I hold on to now is that I hate. Well, I'll say I hate. That's a strong word. You know, when people pass judgment on someone else's religion, it irritates me. You know, I mean, it irritates me to the core because I feel that I've seen people who are Muslims and they're passionate about their belief. I've seen people who are Baptists. I've seen people who are whatever it is. Whatever. My brother is Baha'i, too. You know, so I see that, and it's no way I would want to try to take that away from them or try to impose myself. So I believe that whatever faith that you hold that gives you this sense of, you know, the basic thing that you do unto others as you would like other people to do to you. That's central, you know. You know, so for me, I still hold on to those views. I look at it. I try to translate it in every interaction that I have. You know, I try to look for that moral compass to, you know, to engage with people. I try not to pass judgment on them. I don't go to church every Sunday, but I'm open to it. If someone invites me, I would go to. Okay, I go to the mosque. I go to the church. I go to different places. I don't know. I'm open. I'm still open, but I'm more open to shared experiences. You know, shared understanding, more a connectedness. You know, regardless of what it is. If a person is you know, I think I know what justice looks like, and you know, and sometimes it can be disguised, and you know, injustice can be kind of disguised under the cloak of religion or politics. So you know, so I hope I answered your question. Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, last question.
Okay. At the beginning, you said about, I guess, critiquing like MLK's movement about civil disobedience.
Yeah.
And like why people wouldn't fight back, and like it made me think of like Malcolm X said like famously like there's no such thing as a peaceful revolution.
Yeah.
Do you still believe that you have to not necessarily spread violence, but like you have to flex muscles in order to get what you want?
Okay, what I believe in, you know, unequivocally, is righteous resistance. You know, and that's, you know, that takes a different frame. Like with Malcolm, when he talked about freedom by any means necessary, all that was I think was relevant during the time, and maybe even now. You know, but we have to define what means we're talking about. Martin Luther King, I didn't come to really respect him as a leader. I thought he was, you know, sort of a sellout and all in the movement until I started reading some of his words and how much courage it took to do what he does. I read some things that he says today that makes so much sense. I never heard. I don't know if you heard his speech about Beyond Vietnam, which is a speech he talked about Vietnam, and he talked about the international issue. I never heard of that. Only thing that we heard was I Have a Dream, and that was it. But he is so much more than that, and he's made some profound things. So anyway, I'm just saying that I had a narrow view in my young age because I had this raised. That's why I say that humility is something that I think was missing out of the movement. We had our way of wanting to change society, but we didn't have the humility where we listened to others, and it became, you know, we defeated a lot of our own purposes, I think. And I don't think young people should do that now. They should always have that humility in there. So back, you know, so during that time, I was narrow in much of my views coming out of, you know, but like I said, the only way you can really understand that is know where we came from. What was life like for African Americans during the 60s or the 50s or the 40s? You look back there and you look at the history that at the point of the Black Power movement, that was on the heels of the Civil Rights movement. The Civil Rights movement has collapsed. They tried that, young people were growing up and they was watching this was happening, and that was enraged. Like this is not working. Something's not going. It's still going on. We're fighting. So it was a move. But if you understand the history of it, you can see how it got to that. So now when I came back, I'm able to look on the whole picture. I'm able to look at Martin Luther King in a different light and appreciate him and his sacrifices and what he's done. But that doesn't mean that I diminish what Malcolm was about, because he also was like the godfather of the Black Power movement. He's the one that said, no, freedom by any means necessary. This is not working. This is not working. Look, and pointing to ways of how we can have self-respect for ourselves, how African Americans must be able to, control their own community, and looking at other avenues and being more critical. So, but you have to learn it. You have to realize that in the context in which it emerged. So then and now I'm like this old grandfather now, looking back over, some days and being able to sort of pinpoint some areas that we didn't cover, and hopefully can pass it on to young people so that they can see it. We didn't listen to our parents either, so whatever part of it that you listen to it, the rest of it you'll learn on your own in your own struggle. But that, so it's forward flow of human humanity.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much, Watani. I
bye.
really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if you're interested, we'll follow up in the next meeting, maybe talk a little bit about the project and maybe how we can get involved as an organization and further some of the work that you're doing. Hope you come back. I think we should hire you as a teacher. What do you guys think? Social justice teacher, maybe race relations, like that.